their tears there is loneliness. Lost in their sorrow, may they find the presence of loving friends. Hear them, O God, and be with them. For Irving's love that united us in life and which death cannot sever, for his companionship that was shared along life's path and which continues through the tenderness of memory, for the gifts of his heart and mind that brought joy and happiness and is now a precious remembrance, for all these and more we give our thanks to God. In this time of grief, we listen to the voice of our sacred scriptures that brings us the ever-new message of God's nearness. It tells us of our kinship with the Creator, in light as in darkness, in joy as in sorrow, in life as in death. Poets and prophets have asked, how should we spend the gift of our days? Adonai, who may abide in your house? Who may dwell in your holy mountain? Those who are upright, who do justly, who speak the truth within their hearts, who do not slander others or wrong them or bring shame upon them, who scorn the lawless but honor those who revere God, who give their word and, come what may, do not retract, who do not exploit others, who do not take bribes. Those who live in this way shall never be shaken. The 23rd Psalm. Adonai roi lo echsar, binot esher yarbitzeni, al mei menuchot yenach aleini. Nafshi yeshovev, yancheni b'ma'aklet tzedek, lo ma'an shemo. Gam ki elech b'ketz amavet, lo irara, ki ata imadi. Shiftecha umishantecha, hema yachamuni, te'orech lefanai, shulchan neged sorerai. Dashantav Hashem and Roshi, kosi revaya. Ach, tov v'chesed, yirdifuni koyam echayai, v'shavti b'vet Adonai, le'orech yamim. You are my shepherd, I am content. You lead me to rest in the sweet grasses, to lie down by the quiet waters, and I am refreshed. You lead me down the right path, the path that unwinds in the pattern of your name. And even if I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are with me, comforting me with your rod and your staff, showing me each step. You prepare a table for me in the midst of my adversity and moisten my head with oil. Surely my cup is overflowing, and goodness and kindness will follow me all the days of my life, and in the long days beyond, I will always live within your house. We need light when gloom darkens our lives. We need fortitude and courage when pain and loss assail us. May we find these in God's presence, and let us find them too in loved ones and companions who do God's work by binding up the wounds of the stricken. We are loved by an unending love. We are embraced by arms that find us even when we are hidden from ourselves. We are touched by fingers that soothe us even when we are too proud for soothing. We are counseled by voices that guide us even when we are too embittered to hear. We are loved by an unending love. We are supported by hands that uplift us even in the midst of a fall. We are urged on by eyes that meet us even when we are too weak for meeting. We are loved by an unending love. Embraced, touched, soothed, and counseled, ours are the arms, the fingers, the voices. Ours are the hands, the eyes, and the smiles. We are loved by an unending love. In his sorrow, Job cried out, Adonai natan v'Adonai lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai mevarach. God has given, God has taken away, blessed be the name of God. An ancient people, we are well acquainted with grief and with the valley of shadows. Death and sorrow are not strangers to us, yet the centuries have taught us that a good name endures beyond the grave, and that there is strength in faith. With Job we say, Adonai Natan, O God, you have given. You gave us a loved one who will not be forgotten. For all that was good and enduring in Irving's life, we offer the deepest thanks of our hearts. Adonai Lakach, O God, you have taken away. We pray for the strength to turn our broken hearts into an altar of trust before which we acknowledge your sovereignty and love. As we now say, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevarach, blessed be the name of God, now and forever. Irving Malkin was born on December 25, 1925 in Canton, Ohio, to Mendel and Daisy Malkin. With 4 other brothers, Irving and his family made their way to Cleveland. Irving's father died when Irving was only 14, leaving his mother to bring up 5 sons. It wasn't easy, money was very tight, and this made a lifelong impression on Irving. He was very careful with money, but he was very generous of spirit. Irving graduated from Glenville High School and then went on to Case Institute of Technology for his undergraduate and graduate degrees in electrochemistry. Irving worked for Diamond Shamrock, and his research and development included work in 1970 on inventing a process for developing corrosion-resistant metals. I would love to be able to describe it for you, but the science is a bit over my head. You can Google it, though. I can tell you that this particular invention is cited in over 24 subsequent articles, and listings of his work with fellow scientists go on and on. He retired from Diamond Shamrock in 1985, and from there turned his love of fixing things, of course, researching them first, and making sure that all is in working order as he and his beloved wife, Zerda, acquired and managed Shorehaven Cottages at Pymatuning Lake. Over the years, on Friday nights, you could find Irving and Zerda enjoying Shabbat dinner there with their friends. Irving was quiet but very articulate. He was the kind of person who had both a keen intellect and a great ability to relate to people. He was a nice person and treated everybody well. The staff at Mount Alverna always commented on his kindness to them. Along with that kindness, he was also a killer card player. He loved bridge and poker and pinochle and hearts and chess. He especially enjoyed teaching his grandchildren how to play and playing with them. He loved to camp and hike and fish and sail. When the children were growing up, each year Irving would take 4 weeks vacation and the family would camp around the country. He did love fishing. One has to be very still and very quiet to be a successful fisherman or fisherwoman. And Irving made sure this was part of the Learning to Fish curriculum. Irving enjoyed painting. His family suggests that he was an impressionist, and he loved to read. He and Zerda enjoyed classical music and attended the suburban symphony concerts, along with plays at Domama. They always had lots of friends around, and they loved being with their family. This past summer, I received a call from the director of pastoral care at Mount Alverna Village telling me that there was a Jewish resident who would like to speak with a rabbi. Mount Alverna is a lovely place in Parma with great care and very Christian. I said I would come by and speak with Mr. Malkin, and that we did as best we could over these past months. I think Irving wanted to make sure that his funeral arrangements were all set and Jewish. It is an honor for me to be here today. To Irving's children, Greg and Karen, Bob and Alexi, and Dell, to his grandchildren, Leah and Mike and Hal and Heather, Shana and Ben, Rebecca and Jacob, and to his great-grandchildren, Aurora and Alex and Jeremiah and Sonia and Christopher and Alice, may you find comfort in the time ahead as you share your memories and stories with each other and with friends. And may Irving's memory be for a blessing. Zichrono livracha. Bob and Greg will be sharing some words.
We'll see if I get through this without crying. But first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming to support me and my family in honoring a very special person. I also want to express my deep appreciation to Dell for the time and effort over the last several years to ensure that Dad got the best possible care. She visited our father, every day. Had breakfast with them, stayed on top of the workers at Mount Alverna, and before that Seven Hills, and before that Menorah Park. Fed him breakfast, just provided loving attention, and really devoted her life the last several years to him. And it made a huge difference in his life. So thank you. Working on my remarks for today brought to mind many memories that I'll like to share with you today, but I want to share particularly first an important experience I had in my life with my dad. So around a year ago, at which time my dad was still responsive, so he was pretty unresponsive the last year, and he was still able to speak. So about a year ago, he was able to speak a little bit with difficulty. But at the time, I shared with him many of the thoughts that I'm going to share with you now. I told him stories of the lives we had together and what he meant to me. And I am so grateful that I was able to tell my dad what he meant to me when he could still understand what I was saying, and also when he could still understand what he meant to my life. So for me, it was a lesson learned. Tell someone you love what they mean to you, and tell them when you can still share it with them. Do not wait for the eulogy. I am so glad I did that. I can't tell you. I think the most important question you can ask about someone is whether they made the world a better place. My dad, our dad, did make the world a better place. And he focused on a human scale, not a national or global scale. He focused on things that he could impact directly. And he did it in a quiet way, never seeking recognition, without trumpeting his efforts. He was not a major contributor in terms of dollars, because he was very frugal, to any cause, but rather he gave actually his most valuable gift, and that was his time and his intelligence. In retirement, he devoted many, many volunteer hours as a trail monitor for the Metro Parks and provided tax services through AARP. He eventually actually became the regional tech support person for AARP tax services, spent hours setting up computers in all these offices, providing phone support. In fact, my mother and father were recognized by Ohio's governor for their many hours of volunteering together. But his volunteer efforts didn't really begin with retirement. When I was growing up, my dad was my Cub Scout pack leader. He was my Boy Scout merit badge advisor. He was the Mirror Dinghy Association president, helping to organize local, national, and international sailing races for these little tiny sailboats. I mean, they were really 12 feet long, I think. 11 feet 10 inches. Bob knows it well. He'll be telling you a little about that experience. And Bob's love of sailing really grew out of that experience with my dad and my dad's love of sailing. Family was absolutely a top priority for Dad. He always had time to help me with one of my crazy projects, and I had a lot of crazy projects growing up, like the time I bought this gasoline-powered jet engine that I mounted on a car about this size. And when I lit it off, the flame was about 3 feet long, and the model car never moved. It was really impressive. It roared, but it never moved. Or my attempt to launch an aerial camera with a 20-foot weather balloon, and to save money, an ongoing theme you'll see here. To save money, we filled the balloon with natural gas rather than helium by disconnecting the dryer. So imagine a 20-foot balloon filled with natural gas. It would have taken out our house, probably 3 or 4 houses around the neighborhood, would have killed everybody within a block. And the string broke. It ended up flying off into the air, blowing up somewhere. I'm not sure where. But he built a beautiful toy stove for Dell when she was 3 years old, and she still uses the oven racks from that stove to cool cookies. But my all-time favorite thing my dad built for us was a go-kart. He built this fabulous go-kart that we rode around the front and backyard. It was really great. Really enjoyed that. And he did everything himself. He was really handy, plumbing, painting, home repairs, car repairs, you name it. He enjoyed working with his hands. For me, expresses itself through my woodworking hobby. And of course, he did all this work himself because he was notoriously frugal, which was a trait I did not pick up, by the way. Many of the highlights of my life involve my dad. When I was 11, I remember spending a winter weekend with him at our property in Pennsylvania, clearing trails and a campsite. In my 20s, my dad and I bicycled from Cleveland to Columbus. We continued to bike together well into his 80s. So my dad was doing 20 miles. We typically did the multi-purpose trails. Lenny's here, he rode with us, and into his 80s. It was amazing. In my 30s, my dad and I played tennis regularly. In my 40s, we began an annual tradition of the boys taking week-long adventures together, and this is probably one of the top highlights of my life. The boys started out as just me and Bob, eventually became Bob and I and his grandson, Hal and Jacob. We hiked the Appalachian Trail, went down into the Grand Canyon, climbed Mount Katahdin in Maine, sailed in Lake Erie in North Carolina, biked along the Allegheny River. We just had all these amazing adventures together. And these trips brought out an interesting side of my dad that many of you probably haven't seen, and that's his unusual sense of humor. So one of my favorite stories that I'm going to tell you is about a book he always wanted to write. It was a book that encapsulated his wisdom and provided life lessons he felt for future generations. Now, you're going to have to excuse the language, and I excuse the children here may want to cover their ears at this point, because I feel I need to tell this the way my dad told it. And so I am sorry for my crude language. But the book was titled No Shit. And it was K-N-O-W, not N-O. And my dad loved the double meaning of the title. And he thought it was a very important book, particularly for his sons and grandkids, because, of course, we don't know shit. That's according to him, anyways. And he claimed he really knew his shit because he was full of shit. And the detailed description of the book, I mean, you can imagine. He would go on about each chapter and what the chapters are about. And we were rolling on the floor. And this was always after a couple beers, and we were playing cards and losing at hearts, because he always beat us. And it was great. And those trips are just unbelievable memories for Bob and I and the grandkids. He was a creature of habit, which I've picked up as well. Growing up, dinner was always at the same time at the Malkin family, followed by News with Walter Cronkite. That was a lullaby, actually, for my dad. He always ended up asleep on the couch about halfway through. And I don't think he ever heard Cronkite's immortal words, and that's the way it is. He was always asleep at that point. But the most impactful memory I have of my father was his integrity. He was a man of his word. He was reliable. He always fulfilled his responsibilities to the best of his ability. I never, ever heard him complain about the burdens of his responsibility. I was almost there. So I've tried to live my life every day to the high standard that my father set. He was a major influence and role model in my life. He certainly made my world a better place. And I am thankful every day that I had the great fortune to have him as my father.
So I'm Bob. I'm Greg's brother, Irving's son. And I did want to start by echoing my brother's sentiment. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming. It really means a lot to my family, to my wife and my children, that you're all here to share this event with us. As Greg and Rabbi Enid mentioned, sailing was a big part of my dad's life, and it was a big part of my life with him. So I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how I remember that and how I see it and how I experienced it. You know, some things we remember for the way they are. You remember that the sunset was red or yellow or purple. Or you remember that the drive was long and tedious or short. And some things we remember for the way that they weren't. You know, we all have stories that end like, and after all that, we forgot the potato salad. Or you have a meeting or an event, and you say, oh, it was a very important meeting, but where was Dave? You know, you remember some things you remember for what they weren't, what wasn't there. But other things we remember for the difference that they make on us, for what they leave behind on us. You might even forget the details of the event, or in some cases the event itself. But, you know, for example, every time you smell that smell, you feel anxiety or anticipation. You're not sure why, but it's there. These are real. These memories are real. This is a memory by impression. And we use the word sometimes somewhat casually, like, you know, he made a great first impression. And sometimes we use the same word with a very strong meaning of memory. For example, a little bird imprints its mother's chirp right after birth. A very strong impression. One of the imprints that my dad left on me was sailing. It is the sailing. From age 5 to 17, every warm weekend, I sailed with my dad, and not just sailing, as Greg mentioned, racing. We raced sailboats. And as Greg mentioned, don't get the impression that these were 70-foot yachts. We weren't commanding the crew to tighten the mizzen and uncork the champagne. This was an 11-foot, 10-inch long boat, so this is slightly bigger than a desk. And the cockpit of this boat was smaller than a desk. That's where you sat, was in the cockpit. We both sat there. And there was nowhere to sit where you didn't bump knees, elbows, shoulders all the time. And we spent this time together, really together. And these races were long. We would do, the races were typically 3 hours. We'd do as many as three-hour races in a day. As Greg mentioned, sometimes we did national, international competitions, so we might be 2 days, 3 days in a row, 4, 5 days in a row, 9 hours a day in this little cockpit. And by the way, when I said every warm weekend, really what I meant was the water was a liquid. If the water was a solid, then my dad probably would have gone out sailing on ice, frankly, but nobody else would show up. And so we didn't race on those days. And I remember many, many days sailing in very high winds, very high waves. Remember, this is a long time before cell phones and handheld radios and things like that. And so the way that we would communicate during the races with flags, the race boat would raise flags to indicate, you know, the weather has changed, so take the third buoy to starboard, or, okay, now we're going to do 4 races today instead of 3 races. And I remember many days with strong winds, pelting rain, high waves. I remember the waves like this, but probably the waves were like this. Looking in the binoculars, you know, telling my dad, I think the race is canceled, or there's cheesecake at the buffet. I'm not sure which. And it's probably the cheesecake. They never canceled the races. But actually, though those memories are strong, those are actually not the tough days. I actually enjoyed those days. The tough days actually were the days where there was no wind. We would sit in the boat, glass, water like glass, in silence for 9 hours. And when I mean silence, of course, the wind wasn't rustling the sails, the water wasn't slapping the hull, but neither were we talking. was 9 hours of silence. Those were really tough days. But they left an impression. They left a very long-lasting memory. Of course, part of that impression is, as Greg said, I love sailing. My wife and I just bought a bigger boat, which, by the way, you never buy smaller boats. You just buy bigger boats. So we just bought a bigger boat. We're planning on retiring on the boat a little less than a year from now. We're going to head south, and we'll see where the boat stops. We have a satellite beacon on the boat. We've owned boats for all of my children's lives now, pretty much, and we have a satellite beacon on the boat, and so our friends and family can track us as we're going. By far, the most comments I got on our tracks were from my father. So I would call him or whatever after a trip, and he would ask detailed questions. Why did you take this turn? Or, boy, you were far out in the ocean during that trip, and I don't know whether it was living vicariously through us or some reverse impression. I'm not sure, but certainly he was following us and sharing the trip with us. Another impression he left on me through the sailing was calm. My dad was a calm person. He was a collected person, and I'm not referring to the silence here. What I'm talking about is like, there would be times when the wind was howling, people were in the water, gear was snapping, masts were falling, we were screaming through the water, heeling over, bending over the boat like crazy, right on the edge of capsizing. And that calm really matters in those sort of race situations. I remember once, this is many years later, I raced Hobie Cats. I raced Hobie Cats with a friend of mine, a catamaran. That's a lot of fun. We would race it on a Wednesday night, round the buoys, head to the bar kind of race. And we did some longer races also. One time we were racing back from Key Largo. And on these boats and on the dinghy that I sailed with my dad and on the Hobie Cat, you have to carefully balance your weight. So you move your weight forward or backwards, in or out of the boat. If you don't, the boat capsizes. And you have to carefully manage the wind, the force of the wind. And you do that with ropes. The one that I was in charge of, and the main one on the Hobie Cat, is called the jib sheet. Pull in the sheet, and it pushes the boat farther over, but the boat goes faster. Release the sheet, the boat comes back down, but you go slower. And on this particular day on the Hobie 16, we were flying. And this is actually literally called flying, because the Hobie Cat has two hulls. You're supposed to lift one out of the water. Now, I learned years later you're supposed to lift it 1 inch out of the water, but we were lifting like 10, 15 inches. We were way out of the water. We were just screaming on this day. Lots of fun. And coming back from Key Largo through Key Biscayne, headed by No Name Harbor, past Government Cut, heading now into Miami, into the heart of Miami. It's a fairly congested waterway, lots of boats around, heeling way over, flying the hull, and the jib sheet jammed. The jib sheet jammed, so I could not control the jib. Now, I could have dove down to the rail to unfix, to figure out what the jam was and get it fixed, but then the boat would have capsized. I could have pulled in the sheet, but then the wind would have pushed it hard, and the boat would have capsized. I could have screamed, I guess. But there weren't a lot of choices. This is a bad situation. This is really a bad situation. Congested waterway, moving like heck, out of control boat. But I was calm. And I got that from my father. I got that calm from my father. Now, my buddy, the buddy I was sailing with, his eyes were like saucers. He later told me he was thinking about his childhood sled. So this is bad. But I was calm, and fortunately, we got a little lull in the wind. I was able to dive down and repair the problem, scramble back up, and get the hull back into the water. And we kind of crawled back into the club. But the point is, I was calm. And that's something I got from my dad. I'm sure that I got it from my dad. Another thought about this, these are impressions I'm sharing, but we also have shadow impressions. I'm sure you've seen shadow impressions. Like if somebody writes on a pad of paper, you can take a pencil and kind of rub on it and get the message, or you can rub on a gravestone and kind of get a shadow impression. My dad left shadow imprints as well. My son likes boating. He has made many, many repairs on an never larger boats. My daughter probably saved my life recently when I had a bleeding ulcer. I'd popped an artery, and I was bleeding out. I'd lost half my blood by the time she docked the boat. And 8 firemen climbed on the boat, got me off the deck onto the dock, and then whisked me off to surgery. My children have shadow imprints of my dad. Last sort of thoughts about this. We often say, and we say it kind of casually, but we often say this, that first impressions matter. And they do. And the reason that they do is because these memories last longer. Impression memories last longer. They stay with us longer. When you remember something like the color of the sky, it fades. Those memories fade. They fade quickly. I mean, within minutes or hours, perhaps, you'll forget the details of that sunset. And think about the memories that you have about the things that weren't there. I mean, that story of the potato salad that you remember when I mentioned it earlier, that was probably nothing like that. Probably that was a disaster. It might have been a huge marital fight. But now you remember it as kind of a cute story of things gone wrong. It's nothing like the actual event. The memory is nothing like the actual event. But impressions are different. Impressions you keep with you, they last, they stay with you. The shadow impressions as well stay with you forever. The imprints way outlive other kinds of memory. I'm sure that long after today, long after my father's passing, I'm going to be sailing. I love sailing, and it's because of my father. And my son will probably be sailing. Maybe my daughter's children will be sailing. And that's thanks to my father. Thank you.
Thank you. O God, you give us loved ones and make them the strength of our life, the light of our eyes. They depart and leave us bereft on a lonely way. But you are the living fountain from which our healing flows. To you the stricken look for comfort and the sorrow-laden for consolation. O God, we see life as through windows that open on eternity. We see that love endures and the soul endures as you, O God, endure forever. We see that the years are more than grass that withers, more than flowers that fade. They weave a timeless pattern in a world that is the dwelling place of your love and your glory. I invite you to please rise as we continue now with the El Malei Rachamim, Compassionate God. El Malei Rachamim, Shochein B'Maromim, Hametzei Menucha Nechona, Tachat Kanfei HaShechina, Im Kadoshim Tohorim, Kazohar Harachim Azhirim, Et Nishmat Yitzchak ben Mendel Emmanuel Shahalach Leolamo Baal Harachamim Yastirechu Beseder Kenafav Leolamim V'yitzror b'yitzror hachaim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato Vayanoch b'shalom al mishkavo v'nomar Amen. Compassionate God, eternal Spirit of the universe, grant perfect rest in your sheltering presence to Irving Malkin, who has entered eternity. O God of mercy, let him find refuge in your eternal presence, and let his soul be bound up in the bond of everlasting life. O God, you are his inheritance. May he rest in peace, and let us say, Amen. Please be seated.